I promised you I wouldn't sugarcoat tough messages. The climate plan we inherited from the previous government was well-intentioned and well-suited for the times in which it was designed. The climate crisis is still with us, and our commitment to fighting it is absolute.
When did you last hear a sitting prime minister stand in front of the entire country and admit that the plan was wrong? Not the previous government's plan, not the opposition's plan, the plan his own government inherited and continued, the plan that carried his party's name into the last election, the plan that millions of Canadians were told was the responsible path forward. Mark Carney just looked into a camera and said it was not sustainable, that the emissions projections under the old plan were too ambitious for the economic reality Canadians are actually living in, that the previous approach would have been too expensive, too divisive, and would have failed the very partners Canada needs most right now to break free from American dependency. That is not a talking point. That is not a campaign slogan. That is a prime minister doing something that almost never happens in modern politics. Telling the truth about a mistake before anyone forced him to, and what he is replacing it with is one of the most ambitious energy visions any Canadian leader has ever put forward. Subscribe to Canada Point right now, because tonight we are breaking down the speech that may define the next decade of Canadian life. But before we get to the admission and the fix, let us understand the problem Carney is actually trying to solve. Because he did not walk into this speech with a single challenge. He walked in with three simultaneous crises that are hitting Canadians at exactly the same moment. First, an affordability crisis. Gas prices rising, grocery bills climbing, energy costs squeezing households that were already stretched thin before any of this started. Second, an energy security crisis. The war in Iran has sent global energy markets into chaos. Supply chains that the world assumed were stable have proven dangerously fragile. And Canada, sitting on some of the largest energy reserves on Earth, has been selling most of it at a discount to one customer who has spent the past year treating Canada like an adversary. Third, a climate crisis. Wildfires burning longer and hotter every summer. Floods arriving where floods never came before. A generation of young Canadians watching their forests burn and asking what their government is actually doing about it. Three crises, one speech, and a plan that tries to address all three simultaneously without sacrificing any of them.
Today, we're faced with the types of decisions that come once every few generations, but will determine our future for decades. Our independence, sustainability, and prosperity will depend crucially on our ability to supply and control our energy. So I want to talk to you today about energy. We face an energy crisis on three levels. An affordability crisis. You don't need me to tell you about the price of gas. A security crisis. Fact is, the world's energy supply is being upended by conflict and coercion. And a climate crisis that's burning our forests and threatening our kids' futures. We need an energy transition that really works.
Once every few generations. Carney is not describing a budget adjustment or a policy tweak. He is describing a fundamental restructuring of how Canada produces powers and sells its energy for the next 50 years. And the phrase that matters most in that clip is not about energy at all. It is about control. When we control our own energy, we control our future. That sentence is the philosophical foundation of everything Carney announced. Because the mistake Canada made, the mistake he is now fixing, was not about emissions targets or pipeline approvals or any specific policy decision. The mistake was dependency. Dependency on American markets to buy Canadian oil at discounted prices. Dependency on global supply chains that foreign conflicts can shatter overnight. Dependency on a single customer who can use that dependency as a negotiating weapon whenever it suits their political interests. Control your energy. Control your future. That is the entire strategy compressed into 6 words. See, Carney did something no Canadian Prime Minister has done so directly in modern memory. He named America as a vulnerability, not an enemy, not a rival, a vulnerability. He explained that Canada has increased oil production more than almost any country on Earth this century, that only the United States and Russia have outpaced Canadian production growth, and that almost all of that production has been flowing to a single customer, America, at a discounted price. Not because Asian markets do not want Canadian oil, they desperately do, but because Canada did not have the infrastructure to get it there. And then Carney said the line that should be played in every energy ministry in the world right now: our heavy reliance on the US market was once a strength, but it is now a vulnerability. That sentence represents a complete reversal of the assumption that has governed Canadian energy policy for decades. And it came not from an opposition critic or an academic analyst. It came from the Prime Minister himself in a nationally broadcast address.
And almost all of those exports have gone to one country, the United States. The US pays a discount for Canadian oil in part because it's been pretty much our only customer. That started to change last year when the new Trans Mountain pipeline came online. For the first time, we have direct access from our West Coast to fast-growing Asian markets. That gives us a better price for our oil and more resources to support Canadians. It's also why we're developing options for a second oil pipeline to the West Coast. And it's why we are building a series of projects to export low-carbon, liquefied natural gas to partners in Asia and Europe. As I said last time, our heavy reliance on the US market was once a strength, but it's now a vulnerability.
Did you hear what just happened there? Canada's Prime Minister just told the country, and by extension told Washington, that the economic relationship Trump has been using as leverage against Canada is now officially classified by the Canadian government as a national vulnerability. And the fix is already partially in place. The Trans Mountain expansion pipeline now connects Alberta's oil sands directly to the Pacific coast. Asian buyers are paying full international market price for Canadian crude. The discount America was collecting on Canadian oil is disappearing tanker by tanker. And Carney announced Canada is already developing a second West Coast pipeline, plus a series of LNG export projects to send Canadian natural gas to partners in Asia and Europe. Every one of those projects is a thread cutting Canada's economic dependency on American markets. And Trump is watching it happen with almost no ability to stop it. But the energy independence story goes far beyond oil and pipelines, because Carney did not just announce a plan to sell Canadian resources to different customers. He announced a plan to fundamentally transform how Canada powers itself at home. Double the national electricity grid within the next few decades. A new national electricity strategy linking provincial systems for the first time. A complementary nuclear energy strategy building new reactors and exporting Canadian nuclear expertise globally. Electrification of transportation, buildings, and industry at a scale Canada has never attempted. And the number he put on it is genuinely remarkable. 7 in 10 Canadian households paying less for their total energy by 2050. $15 billion returned to Canadian pockets. Not through government checks, through efficiency, through electric machines that are 2 to 4 times more productive than the fossil fuel alternatives they replace. That is not a climate policy dressed up in economic language. That is an economic policy that happens to also address climate change. And that framing matters enormously for how Canadians across political lines receive it.
Our answer to domestic energy affordability, security, and sustainability is the same answer as Sir Adam Beck's: to power our way to a stronger, more resilient, more independent country that works for all. Because the path to affordability is electrification. The path to competitiveness is electrification. The path to sustainability is electrification.
The path to affordability, the path to competitiveness, the path to sustainability. 3 different problems, 1 answer, delivered 3 times so nobody misses it. That rhetorical structure is not accidental. Carney is an economist and a communicator who understands that policy only moves public opinion when it connects multiple concerns to a single solution. Canadians worried about their energy bills, electrification helps you. Canadians worried about jobs and economic competitiveness, electrification helps you. Canadians worried about climate and wildfires and their children's future, electrification helps you. No one left out, no coalition broken. No region told their concerns do not matter. And the Sir Adam Beck reference throughout this speech is worth understanding, because Carney is not just invoking a historical figure for nostalgia. He is drawing a direct line between the Ontarian who harnessed Niagara Falls for public benefit over a century ago and what Canada is being asked to do right now. Beck did something that seemed impossible at the time. He built at a scale nobody believed was achievable, and he built it for everyone, not just for profit. Carney is saying Canada needs to do that again. Bigger, faster, and this time for the entire country, not just one province. And now the moment that makes this speech genuinely historic. Most politicians, when they inherit a flawed plan from their predecessors, do one of two things. They quietly bury it and hope nobody notices, or they loudly blame the previous government and pretend they always knew better. Carney did neither. He stood in front of the country and said the old climate plan was well-intentioned, that the people who designed it were not wrong given the world they were designing it for, that the goal, fighting climate change, remains completely unchanged, and his commitment to it is absolute. And then he said the world changed. The certainties of 2015 are gone. The geopolitical environment is the most hostile since Confederation. The economic pressure on ordinary Canadians is too great. And a plan designed for a stable, predictable world cannot survive in the unstable, unpredictable one, Canada.
The changes we have made will mean that our emissions will be higher in the next few years than they were projected to be under the previous government's plan. But in my judgment, that plan was not sustainable over the long term. It would have been too expensive for Canadians who are already struggling with affordability. It would have let down our partners who need new sources of energy, and it would do so right at the time when we need them to help us become more independent of the United States.
Our emissions will be higher. 4 words that no politician ever wants to say out loud. 4 words that the opposition will clip and use in attack ads. 4 words that environmental advocates will highlight with anger and frustration. And Carney said them anyway. Because here is what makes this admission different from a political failure. He did not say the goal changed. He said the timeline changed because the world changed. The destination remains clean, sustainable, prosperous Canada. The route has been adjusted because the original route was running through an economic reality that no longer exists. And then he said something even more revealing. The old plan would have let down the partners Canada needs to become independent of the United States. Read that carefully. Canada changed its climate strategy in part because keeping the old strategy would have undermined the relationships Canada needs to escape American economic dependency. That is not a retreat on climate. That is a strategic prioritization of sovereignty, with a promise that the clean energy build happening right now will ultimately deliver more emissions reduction than the previous plan ever could have achieved. And then Carney said something that stopped the entire policy conversation and turned it into something much more profound. Trust has become the most valuable commodity in a world where Iranian conflict is disrupting oil supply, where trade wars are reshaping global commerce, where alliances that seemed permanent are suddenly fragile, where the rules-based international order is being tested daily. The most valuable thing Canada has is not its oil, not its minerals, not even its educated workforce or its stable democracy. It is its reputation for keeping its word. Countries that are desperately looking for stable energy partners are not just evaluating reserves and pipeline capacity. They are evaluating whether the government they sign a contract with today will still honor that contract 5 years from now, regardless of who wins the next election. Canada's answer to that question is the strongest in the world, and Carney is building an entire foreign energy strategy on that foundation. Buy Canadian energy not just because it is good energy, but because Canada is the partner you can actually trust. At the end of the speech, Carney read something that stopped everything. A bronze inscription found in national parks across Canada, placed at the most beautiful spots in the country, dedicated to Canadians who died overseas so that future generations could enjoy what we have today. He did not read it for sentiment. He read it as a challenge. Those Canadians built something, protected something, sacrificed something so that we could stand here today and ask what we are going to build for the people who come after us. And his answer to that question is the most ambitious energy program Canada has attempted since the country was founded. Asian markets replacing American dependency. A doubled electricity grid. Nuclear energy exported globally. LNG shipped to partners who need Canadian reliability. Clean energy built at a scale that would have seemed impossible to previous generations. Will it work? That is the honest question. The grid has to be doubled in a short timeline. The permitting reforms have to actually happen. The provincial partnerships have to hold. The Indigenous consultation has to be genuine, not performative. And the promise that long-term emissions will be lower despite short-term increases has to be delivered on rather than quietly forgotten. Those are real challenges that deserve real scrutiny. But what cannot be questioned is the honesty of the man who stood up and said, "We made a mistake. Here is why. Here is what we are changing, and here is what we are building instead." In a political world full of leaders who never admit anything, Canada's Prime Minister just admitted something difficult in front of the entire country, and then told them exactly how he is going to fix it. Subscribe to Canada Point for honest analysis of the biggest stories shaping Canada's future. Turn on notifications and we will see you in the next one. Actually inhabits today.